What's our objective today? Stop the tariffs. What's our objective tomorrow? Stop the tariffs. We're going to be appointing our first fentanyl czar. The words were chosen carefully. Fentanyl czar, who will serve as the main interlocutor between the Canadian and U.S. governments and will enhance our collaboration in combating fentanyl.
Public Safety Minister David McGuinty there detailing the boosted border security plan that won Canada a one-month reprieve from the imposition of American tariffs on all Canadian imports, a plan that includes the creation of a new, yet-to-be-filled role of fentanyl czar in a declaration of Mexican cartels as terrorist entities. To get some more reaction to what comes next, Danielle Smith is Alberta's Premier. Hi, Premier Smith. Good to have you back on the show. Thank you very much for making the time.
Hi, Bashi.
In your weekend op-ed, Premier, you stated calm, logical discussion is far more effective than tough guy rhetoric when dealing with a misguided ally. Do you give the federal government any credit for this, 30-day pause? Was standing up to Donald Trump essentially necessary to make some progress?
I think that the arrangement that they came to yesterday, having the fentanyl czar and a cross-border collaboration, declaring Mexican cartels terrorist groups, and committing a number, 10,000 people who would be dedicated to this issue. I think that all satisfied the Americans' concern that we were going to take the fentanyl issue seriously. I think that's what led to a 30-day reprieve. Now it's going to be a matter of making sure that we show some progress on that in order to make sure that it doesn't come back.
Is it your impression then that essentially extending this pause will be predicated on action at the border? And I ask because in one sense, that's what the executive order says. That's what all the communication yesterday said. But in another sense, just hours before the reprieve was announced, the president is going on and on and on about annexing Canada.
I think that there's two conversations we're having with the U.S. administration. One conversation is the tariffs related to fentanyl. And the second conversation is all of the irritations that the administration has with the CUSMA agreement. And I don't think we should intermingle those two. I think we've got to address the fentanyl issue to avoid the 25% tariffs. And then the second stage is having an election so we can have a government who can spend 4 years renegotiating the CUSMA. I think if we try to intermingle those two, then we're not going to satisfy the concerns around fentanyl. So I'd like to stay focused on fentanyl, make some progress in the next 30 days, and then hope we can move on to the next stage when we've got a new elected government at the federal level.
Is it us as Canadians, though, who are intermixing them, or is it the president himself? Because I would note, for example, his public statement last night on the reprieve concluded with essentially him saying, let's see if we can reach an economic, agreement by the end of this, while our statement focused very much on the border. And again, he's the one talking over and over again about the utility of Canada becoming the 51st state.
I think it's both. I think that we need to make progress on fentanyl so that we don't end up seeing the 25% tariffs come back. And we need to make progress on the things that are irritating to the Americans, the digital media tax, the banking industry, telecom, supply management. Those keep coming up, but those can only be resolved in the context of a broader renegotiation of the Canada-US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. And that's not scheduled to be done until 2026. So we need an election. We can't have one prime minister start those discussions, a second prime minister carry it a few yards, and then a final prime minister negotiate it. We'd be much better off solving the issue around fentanyl so that it doesn't come back with the high punitive tariffs, and then getting an election so that we can get someone at the table to do the brass tacks negotiation for the next 4 years.
There will be an election, though, before those negotiations are supposed to start in earnest.
I sure hope so. I mean,
well, there will be.
As we all know, there is the ability for a new prime minister to try to negotiate a new deal with either the Bloc or the NDP to stay in until October. We also know our Constitution allows for an election that could be held as late as October 2026. I think that would be very damaging to the country. I just want to make sure everyone knows my view. Let's get a new leader in place in the Liberals, and let's get to an election right away. If they win, then we know who is at the table for the next 4 years. If it's somebody else, then let's get that resolved.
You spoke over the weekend and released a statement when the initial executive order was signed, basically intimating that your lobbying efforts in the United States had led to a better outcome for oil and gas because energy got a 10% tariff instead of the 25% tariff. What do you tell your province's farmers or manufacturers? Were you not advocating for them?
I was advocating for everyone. I think we were very successful in making the argument about energy resources. And let's remember that the definition of energy resources is very wide. It's oil, gas, electricity, critical minerals, uranium. So every single province benefited from the recognition that the Americans need that. I think we can make similar arguments on food. I think whether it's cattle or whether it's grains, I think that goes into an American supply chain that adds value added, and it's the exact same argument. I think the same could be made for auto parts. The fact that auto parts go back and forth across the border 6 or 7 times to create a finished car, that's a very strong argument to maintain those supply chains. So it's up to each premier to make those arguments. But I think the fact that we had a breakthrough on energy resources writ large, I think that shows that there is a pathway for us to demonstrate the supportive value that Canada has and why this relationship is so unique and so strong and should stay that way.
Is it your intention, though, over the next month to advocate for all those other areas that you talked about? Because I think Canadians have an impression that, some premiers are advocating for something, others are advocating for other things. There's somewhat of a federal voice unifying everything, but not really at all the time. Could you be blunt with Canadians? Is it your plan over the next 30 days to advocate for a pause writ large, or will you continue to focus solely on energy?
I've never been focused solely on energy. I've always focused on this special trading relationship we have as a reason for Canada as a whole, every province, all products, to be able to go across the border tariff-free. I think our strongest argument is around our energy resources. As you've seen, we've had a breakthrough, and now we just have to work on making sure the Americans understand that entire picture across all tariffs. But I don't want to get distracted on the economic arguments without understanding that we have to address the issue of fentanyl deaths. When I talk to members of the administration, they're very aware that 75,000 Americans a year die of fentanyl. We have a fentanyl overdose problem in Alberta that we've been tackling for 6 years. So let's work together to try to stamp that out for good. And then we can get on to talking about the economic.
We've talked before about not to take away anything from, obviously, the poisonous supply and the impact it's had on both Canadians and Americans' lives. But the data from border authorities in the U.S. clearly shows that our border, when it comes to fentanyl, it's a fraction of the seizures that are happening overall at both borders. Were you making those points when you were talking about the border? Because the way that you've communicated around it seems to accept the characterization of the U.S., which is not based in fact.
Well, it's not helpful to tell the Americans, well, we've only provided you a supply that would kill 9.5 million Americans. That's not a persuasive argument, and I think we should stop using it. I think we need to understand Canada's problem is different. Canada had a big problem with TD Bank acting as a money launderer. They got a $3 billion fine. We've had our casinos in British Columbia act as money laundering. We have the issue of not actually examining containers when they come in on our ports. We don't examine every car that comes across the border. We have cars being stolen and stuffed with drugs and sent outside of Montreal ports. We've got packages coming across the border through Amazon that go unchecked. So just because we haven't found it, maybe it's because we don't have the processes in place to be able to find it. Maybe that's what the Americans are raising. And now we have an opportunity to address that because our people are dying too. And we shouldn't be complacent about that. We should want to work with them in our own interest to be able to stamp out the cartels as well.
Yeah, and I certainly don't think anyone's advocating for complacency. And I think even in, for the benefit of Canadians, which I think something you and other premiers have said, like there's nothing wrong with addressing the fentanyl issue. But and I take your point about not saying, well, only X amount of people are dying, but that takes away completely from the factual basis. Like, he wants to punish us in the same way he's punishing Mexico, predicated on some sort of pretext around the border when it doesn't exist in the same way. Why don't you want to make that argument at all?
He wants us to recognize that Canada enjoys a very special relationship with the U.S. that no other country in the world enjoys, and just show the respect of taking seriously the fact that they've got people dying and they want it to stop. That's it. We should stop making excuses, stop saying, yeah, but we're not as bad as the other guys. We should just say, yes, we agree. and we're going to take care of our part of the issue so you don't have to worry about us anymore. So that's all I would say, is that what he's observing is that things are a lot worse than they were last time he was in, that things are going in the wrong direction. We've got to reverse that. So I would say no excuses. Let's just work on that. And then hopefully 30 days from now, we'll have made enough progress that we can move on to some of the other issues.
Why are presenting facts, though, excuses? Like the way you're describing it is just accept the way President Trump characterizes things and kind of roll over. I'm not sure Canadians would be comfortable with that.
Well, I'm not comfortable with the fact that over 1,000 people per year die in my province from fentanyl. I'm not comfortable with the fact that cartels are operating in my province. I'm not comfortable with the fact that I'm having to shut down super labs and drug houses. I'm not comfortable with that either. And so I'm not going to downplay the serious tragedy and loss of life in my province because of the Mexican cartels and this poisonous drug that has caused the addiction. So I see it a bit differently, I think, from you, Vashi. I think it's just as serious an issue for me in my province as it is for the Americans in their country, and that we've got to crack down on it, and this is our opportunity.
So you don't see any value in, and I'm not saying dismissive, like I'm not saying be dismissive. I don't think Canadians want to be dismissive of the fentanyl crisis, which is a crisis on this side of the border as well. But the idea that President Trump is describing, what comes into the United States as responsible for the numbers that he's put out there, like, again, the facts don't bear that out. Why are you unwilling to concede that?
Well, because we haven't done the analysis yet. Let's examine every package. Let's examine everything, every container coming into our ports. Let's examine every truck coming and going in our country. And then we would be able to say, okay, we feel confident that it's not us. We can't say that right now because our people are dying too. And so the fentanyl's coming from somewhere, the precursor drugs are coming from somewhere. We had a major case that took place in Alberta this week where one of these guys who was busted in 2021 just got 16 years in prison. We've got a couple more cases like that coming. I'm not going to downplay that. That's serious business, and we're doing everything we can to do law enforcement as well as our recovery approach to getting people off drugs. And we've been talking about that as a government for 6 years. So I'm going to show how serious we are and do as much as we can to make sure that our own people are made safe.
Just one question before I let you go on sort of the longer term prospects for escaping these tariffs. Based on your communication, based on the way the last 24, 48 hours unfolded, what do you think the chance of permanently escaping the application of these tariffs is?
Well, I think there's two tariffs. I think the fentanyl tariffs, the 2510 tariffs will come back if we do not make serious efforts to reduce the number of deaths that are happening in the U.S. that we're responsible for with fentanyl. So I think we have to make sure that we take that part of it seriously. And then round two is a renegotiation of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, which hopefully a new government will get underway as soon as we get past this initial crisis. But we have to look at them as two different discussions we're having with the U.S. And it's probably going to be a hard negotiation, but it'll be a lot better to start that negotiation with a government that has a 4-year mandate.
All right, I'll leave it on that note. Premier, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vashi.